Okay, so we'll begin. Are there questions? Okay, so if not, let me start. Okay. So first, let me make some corrections to the previous lecture. This I have already sent to by email, but let me just mention it anyway. So some corrections. And it's essentially the fact that when we calculate the opacity, we do not normally include the contribution from the neutral atom scattering. And the reason is that the scattering cross section of a photon, elastic scattering, okay, of a photon from a neutral atom falls rapidly with its frequency. In fact, I had sent you a reference to a paper, okay, where you will see that the cross section goes as cross section is proportional to omega to the 4, which, and the scale of course is set by the roughly the ionization energy of the order of EVs. So as the temperature is falling, okay, and that's when the 1s states become important. So even though N1s is much larger than Ne at that when the recombination is happening, the scattering probability from 1s state is still very small. And because of this, it's I mean, we can ignore the scattering from 1s. So basically, you only look at the scattering from the free electrons, and when that falls below an appropriate rate, okay, you have the last scattering surface. Okay, after which there is no further scattering. Okay, so with this, I'll now start a new topic, which in fact we discussed in the near the end of the last lecture. That this time we have to go beyond the standard model, as we'll see. So the topic that I'll cover first is baryon asymmetry. And baryon asymmetry, it basically refers to the fact that we have more baryons than antibaryons. And the question will be, where does it come from? Now, one could say that, okay, it might have been present from the beginning. So even if we assume that the universe started with some asymmetry, we have seen that inflation basically dilutes it. And essentially the point is that during inflation, lambda blows up. During inflation, lambda increases by a large factor. Okay, and we have seen, assuming that the inflation took place at about 10 to the 16 GeV, lambda during inflation goes to at least 10 to the 60 or e to the 60 times lambda. Which basically means that the densities which go as 1 over lambda cube, they go to e to the minus 180 times original density. So even if you start with an original asymmetry, which is of order 1, by the time you end inflation, okay, it will be diluted by a factor of e to the minus 180, and it will have no significant effect on our universe. So this basically means that we must produce it. So this implies that we must somehow produce it after inflation. So what I'll discuss now is are there some general conditions under which are needed, which are necessary, may not be sufficient, which are necessary for producing baryon asymmetry, and then I'll discuss specific cases, the possible ways it could be produced. So these conditions are known as Sakharov's condition. Okay, in fact, I'll be stating it in the context of baryon number, but any asymmetry that you want to generate, we have to satisfy these conditions. Okay, so these are stated as 3 conditions. So I'll first state these 3 conditions and then I'll describe their origin. So the first condition is that a microscopic theory must have baryon number violating interactions. This, in a sense, is more or less obvious, because if we didn't have a baryon number violating interactions, you couldn't produce non-zero baryon numbers starting with a universe which has 0 baryon number, right? Because the baryon number would be conserved. So you certainly need baryon number violating interactions. So this I'll not discuss any further. This is obvious. Second condition, which is a little less obvious, is that the microscopic theory must have C and CP violation, where C is the charge conjugation symmetry and P is the parity symmetry. So C stands for charge conjugation. P stands for parity. And the third condition, okay, which is maybe even less obvious, is that the universe must be out of thermal equilibrium. So I'm going to discuss these second and third conditions, their origin. Okay, the first condition is more or less is clearly obvious. So second condition, C and CP violation. Now intuitively, this follows from the following observation, that imagine that suppose that some process which is going on in the universe produces more baryon than antibaryon. Then its charge conjugate process, okay, where we replace all the particles by the charge conjugate states, then its charge conjugate process will produce more B bar than B. Right? Because in the charge conjugation, you basically replace all the particles by their antiparticles. And if it is a symmetry, then the charge conjugation of the process will have exactly the same rate as the original process. So if the original process was producing some amount of B, then the charge conjugate process will produce the same amount of B bar. Okay, so if it was producing more B than B bar on the average, then the charge conjugate process will produce more B bar than B. And the same argument holds for Cp. Okay, that the Cp conjugate process will produce more B bar than B, and hence, if Cp is an exact symmetry, then you cannot create barrier number. One can try to make it a formal, make a more formal statement, and that you can do as follows. So formally, suppose that the universe is described by some density matrix. Okay, so this is just a pure technical point that it's described a density matrix. I'll explain why we talk in terms of density matrix. But suppose you have a system that is described by some density matrix, and it has equal number of matter and equal amount of matter and antimatter. So that for any configuration that is present with is charge conjugate is also present. Okay, which has opposite matter, which has where matter is replaced by antimatter and antimatter is replaced by matter. Okay. So then, initially, okay, because there is no asymmetry, C rho C inverse or C dagger, this is rho, and similarly for the Cp. Okay, I'm not writing the Cp separately, but this is, so initially this is the case. Now we know that with time rho evolves. With time, rho evolves as e to the iht rho e to the minus iht. Okay, so let's call it rho t. Then it's clear from these equations and the fact that C and H commute, CH, C inverse is H. Okay, if C is an exact symmetry, then this is true. Then this plus this together implies that C rho t, C inverse is also rho t. That means rho t is charge conjugation invariant. And hence rho t describes a system which also has equal matter and antimatter. Okay, because if you didn't have equal matter and antimatter, then of course it will not be invariant on a charge conjugation. And the same argument works for C. Now, the reason that we use this notion of density matrix, so let me just explain this. Okay, it is not a very serious one, but it's good to keep in mind anyway. Okay. That let's imagine that in the universe we have some particles and some antiparticles. Okay, so let's call the particles by black dot and antiparticles by red dot. Okay, and they are roughly equal density. Okay, in fact, they're equal density. That's the starting point. Then this state is not charge conjugation invariant, because under charge conjugation, what will happen is that the black dots will be replaced by red dots and red dots will be replaced by black dots. But it's not the same configuration. So when you talk in terms of density matrix, effectively what you are doing is that you are averaging over all possible positions of these black dots and red dots. So in the density matrix, we average over different distributions of distribution of matter in space. So while as a pure state, this is not necessarily charge conjugation invariant because it has some matter in some region and antimatter in another region. Once you average, okay, over this distribution of matter and antimatter in space, distribution of everything in space, then rho becomes actually C invariant. Okay, so rho is C invariant. And that's why we formally state this in terms of density matrix. Okay. Physically, what it is saying is that when you start with a configuration like this, okay, it's not that everywhere you produce the same amount of matter and antimatter, okay, but in some region you may produce more matter, baryon than antibaryon, okay, but in some other region you'll produce more antibaryon than baryon because in those regions antimatter is more dominant than matter. And at the end, it averages out to having no baryon excess. Okay, so that's the physical content of this use of density matrix. Okay, but
so
yes, go ahead, please.
Rho does not have to be dependent on temperature, right?
Yeah, rho could depend on temperature, right? But the temperature dependence is like e to the minus beta h, right? That obviously commutes to the charge conjugation operator. So if you take a thermal ensemble, purely thermal ensemble, right? You allow everything, then it's manifestly charge conjugation invariant because H commutes with C.
But if there are terms that violate this charge conjugation invariance, then from the beginning, rho would be matter dominated or antimatter dominated.
Yeah. So that's why I'm saying that. So you need C violation, right? So I was trying to argue why we need C violation for this process to take place. So if C is violated, then there's no problem, right? Then this issue doesn't arise. I'm trying to argue why C violation is necessary. Right? And so what this argument is saying that if C is actually a symmetry of the theory, then you have problem. Then starting from a system where you have equal amount of matter and antimatter, you cannot produce more matter than antimatter.
Yeah.
But of course, if C is violated microscopically, then there's no issue at all, right? Then you don't have to go through the discussion at all. And the same is true for CP. Is this point clear?
Yeah.
Any other question? Okay, so this then explains why we need C and CP violation. Now, CPT is always a symmetry, right? So you can that we discussed in the QFT course. So CPT is always a symmetry of a local quantum field theory. So one might ask, can we run this argument with CPT? Okay. And the point is that the fact that CPT is a symmetry doesn't actually affect this argument. Okay, you can still have baryon number asymmetry because the expanding universe breaks time reversal invariance anyway. So CPT only says that if in an expanding universe you produce more matter than antimatter, then in the time reverse process, in a contracting universe, you'll produce more antimatter than matter. Okay, but it doesn't tell us that in a theory which has CPT invariance, you cannot produce more matter than antimatter because time reversal is broken by the expanding universe.
So
yes, go ahead, please.
Is spontaneous symmetry breakdown considered as some sort of violation?
Yes, spontaneous symmetry breaking is also fine. So you don't have to have C invariance broken explicitly. It could be broken spontaneously also.
Like after inflation?
After inflation, yes, exactly.
So, but isn't spontaneous breakdown a statistical effect? Like we would average over it also. So we should, on average, see the same amount of matter and antimatter.
Yeah, except that in our universe, right, if C is spontaneously broken, within our horizon, C is broken in the same way.
So that must happen during inflation.
that must happen during inflation. Maybe I didn't.
Like after inflation, points cannot communicate anymore. Like
Yeah, certainly. So I mean, the region that describes our universe, right? That would have had to already gone into the broken C phase
yeah,
before the inflation. Yes. Otherwise, there will be domain once in the universe. Okay, which separates out the domain in which C the field has one value and another region where the field has another value.
yeah, in the same horizon.
Exactly, in the same horizon. Okay? And that will be inconsistent with what you observe also.
Yeah,
So C can be spontaneously broken, but it had to happen over the whole universe, right? Which means it has to happen before the inflation or during inflation. Any other question? Okay, so now I come to the last condition, and that is the out of thermal equilibrium. Okay, this is perhaps intuitively the least obvious, but let me explain why this is necessary. So the third condition, the universe must be out of thermal equilibrium. So this in fact follows from something we have discussed earlier, that let's imagine, suppose we have some conserved densities. Okay, which we called NL, N tilde L. And they are given by some linear combinations of the number densities of individual spaces. Okay, so this was written as CL alpha times N alpha minus N bar alpha. Okay. And here I have already used the fact that the particles and antiparticles contribute equally. Okay, so N alpha is the density of alpha kind of particle, and N bar alpha is the density of alpha kind of antiparticle. And we are assuming that these charges are conserved. Then we introduce chemical potential for each of them. Introduce chemical potential mu tilde L for each conserved charge. And then we showed that the mu alphas of individual particles, okay, are related to mu tilde L by a similar formula, except that now the sum runs over L. Okay, so here let me say L runs from 1 to capital L. So mu alpha was given by a formula like this, and mu bar alpha, the chemical potential for the antiparticle, was given by minus. So the chemical potentials for particles and antiparticles are opposite. This we had seen. Then we proved one result, which is the following. So let me remind you that if N tilde L is 0 for all L, that means if there are no conserved charges, then the solution for mu tilde L is that mu tilde L equal to 0 for L equal to 1 to L. And then you check the consistency of the solution, because if mu tilde L is 0, then from this equation it will follow that mu alpha and mu bar alpha are also 0. So this will imply that mu alpha is 0 and mu bar alpha is 0 for every every alpha, okay, all particle spaces. And now if we use the formula for the number densities, so let me write that down also. We have seen it many times, but doesn't harm to see it once more. So n alpha was g alpha over 2 pi integral 0 to infinity k squared dk. So minus or plus. And n bar alpha was given by a similar formula with mu replaced by minus mu. So now you see that if mu alpha is 0 for every alpha, that's what this equation is telling us, then n alpha and n alpha bar are equal. So every species has equal number of particles and antiparticles. That of course is consistent now. You can see that this gives the n tilde else to 0, right? That's what we started with. So it does satisfy the required equation. The n tilde L is 0. But this has another consequence. This tells us that every charge, whether conserved or not, is 0. Because whatever charge we define gets equal and opposite contribution from particles and antiparticles. So in particular, even if baryon number is not conserved, even if the first and the second conditions are satisfied, so that is in principle possible to produce baryon number, as long as the universe is in equilibrium, it just follows from simple statistical mechanics that no baryon number will be produced, because in equilibrium, the number of particles and antiparticles will always be equal if you start from a system which has no conserved charge. And that in turn means that the baryon number will continue to be 0. Is this point clear?
This could also be stated in a way that, we also derived that the ddt of nl lambda cube is also 0. It does not change with time. So if it was initially 0, it will always remain 0.
That ddt of
the conserved charges times lambda cube. ddt of nl lambda cube.
Yes. Okay. Lambda cube equal to 0. Yes.
So if it was initially 0.
Yes.
It will always remain 0 if the system isn't under equilibrium.
Yeah. All the n tilde L's are 0. Right?
Yeah.
But what this is saying is that not only all the n tilde L's are 0, but even so these are conserved charges. But what this is saying is that even the non-conserved charges are 0. Right? Because NB, right? NB has a formula, will have a formula like this, right? This is not a conserved charge, but nevertheless, it will have a formula like, let's call it A alpha times n alpha minus n bar alpha. Right? Where A alpha is the baryon charge carried by the alpha species. So even if NB is not conserved, what this is saying is that NB will continue to be 0.
Okay, yeah.
So this is the important point, that as long as you are in thermal equilibrium, conserved charges of course will remain 0, okay, because you started with 0, but even the non-conserved charges will remain 0.
Sir, but wasn't like n tilde L equals 0 for all L a demand that we put additionally?
No, inflation will do that, right?
Yeah, okay.
Because inflation will erase every information about any charge density.
All right, yeah.
Okay, so you really start with n tilde L equal to 0. Any other question? Okay, so let me now discuss, okay, how much of this can be achieved in the standard model. Okay, because before you go to beyond the standard model physics, okay, you should try to explore whether standard model itself can do it. So can standard model do it? So condition 2 is easy. C and CP violation are in fact present in standard model. Already present, so you don't have to do anything. Even though the amount of violation is small, okay, and may not be enough to produce the kind of baryon number that we want, okay, but at least it's there, okay, so it could produce some baryon number, okay, if not the amount that you want. So then B violation. So here the classical theory, classical Lagrangian, has a symmetry that implies P conservation. Okay, so let me explain what this symmetry is. So basically, the B assignment is that all the quarks carry one third, have one third, anti-quarks have minus one third, and everything else has zero. Okay. So when I say that there is a classical Lagrangian has a symmetry that implies B conservation, the symmetry essentially takes the quarks and gives it a phase of e to the I theta by 3. It takes the anti-quarks and gives it a phase of e to the minus I theta by 3, and everything else is neutral. Okay, that's the symmetry. And you can explicitly check when you write down the standard model Lagrangian, the standard model Lagrangian does have this symmetry. So B violation is not at least there in the classical Lagrangian. However, it turns out that this symmetry is anomalous. So it fails in quantum theory. So given this, one might wonder, why don't you see it in nature, right? I mean, as far as you know, there is no baryon number violation in nature. Okay, protons remain there forever. Okay, but if there is a B violation, it could have decayed to lighter particles, okay, like positron and some neutral particle. And the reason that it's not there is that one can actually estimate the amount of violation. Okay. And what one can show the violation of that we see is proportional to e to the minus 4 pi square over the electric coupling square. Okay, the dimension is electric coupling. And this, when you put in the value of GW square, which is about 1/10, right, I think you get a number like 10 to the minus 160. So it's very, very small. Okay, not observable today. However, one finds at high temperature, this violation disappears. I'll not try to explain the origin of this, okay? But roughly what happens is that this baryon number violation is tied to tunneling between different vacua. Okay? And that tunneling probability is very small at zero temperature or in that low energy. Okay? But once you raise the temperature to sufficiently high value, okay, which is of the order of 100 GeVs, the standard model scale, okay, then the tunneling is no longer suppressed, okay, and the baryon number violation becomes a water immunity. Okay, so at high temperature, this violation does disappear. Okay, sorry, not this violation, this suppression, I should say. This suppression disappears. Okay. And one can indeed have baryon number violation, even in the standard.
Also, this tunneling is a field theoretic process, right? Whatever you said.
Yes, indeed.
Sir, in that, where does temperature even come in? Like the notion of temperature.
Okay, the temperature comes in the following sense that if you have, I mean, it's like having a periodic potential. So at zero temperature, you are like somewhere here, right? And in order to tunnel, there is this WKB suppression. You have to do this integral, right? That this barrier is there. But at high temperature, you have large energy, right? The energy densities are large. So you are somewhere here, right? Average energy densities. And then this suppression becomes small. You can go back and forth between different vacuum without having this tunneling barrier. So that's where temperature comes in. Okay, because you have enough energy densities so that the tunneling becomes a classical process rather than a quantum process. Is that point clear?
Isn't that just saying that the particles have high energy?
Well, yeah, I mean, roughly you can say that, okay? But it's not the particles which are tunneling, it's actually the ground state which is tunneling. The actual ground state wave function is, in this case, a superposition, but the coefficient is very small, right? But at high temperature, okay, you have to think in terms of the effective field theory, okay, which I'm going to discuss in a few minutes, not exactly in this context, but in another context. And in that effective description, okay, it's the whole universe that is tunneling, right? It's the average property. It's not that each particle is tunneling. Okay, that's not the correct way to think of this. Okay? It's the average properties of the average system that is tunneling. Okay? But roughly, you can say that as long as you have enough energy density available, right? Not energies in individual particles, but energy densities, okay, in a given region, then the tunneling probability becomes of order 1. So it's more like a collective phenomenon. It's not just one particle having energy that is enough.
Is it like a phase transition?
You can say it is like a phase transition, except that in this case, this particular thing is continuous. Okay? But there is a notion of phase transition that I'm going to discuss.
Okay.
Okay, here the point is as you go higher and higher up, right? This tunneling itself, one doesn't think in terms of phase transition. As one goes higher and higher up, the suppression probability becomes smaller and smaller, right? As a function of temperature. And by the time you have reached here, okay, the suppression has gone away. So it's a continuous process. But there is a notion of phase transition at high temperature that I'm going to discuss in a few minutes.
All right.
Okay. Okay, so this basically shows that in principle, in standard model at high temperature, conditions 1 and 2 are satisfied. So one has to ask about condition 3. Namely, was the universe in equilibrium or out of equilibrium at high temperature. Universe out of equilibrium. So this question seems to be tied to a phase transition, okay, and that's what we have to discuss now. So this is tied to a phase transition, what is called the electroweak phase transition. So for this, let's recall the Higgs potential. Okay, the Higgs potential. Okay, so there are Higgs field in the Standard Model actually has two complex components or four real components, but I'll just draw one direction here. So the Higgs potential roughly has the following structure, right? It has a structure like this. The zero of the potential is not important. Okay, but because strictly speaking, I should have drawn this as zero because the cosmological constant is almost zero today, right? So this should have been zero, but again, the origin, this is not important. We don't think of the value of the potential as very important here, but the shape. So basically, this is saying that the Higgs potential has a maximum at the origin and then it has a minimum somewhere else. And that's what is responsible for electroweak symmetry. Now at finite temperature, one can introduce the notion of an effective potential. Here is the Higgs. And in StatMech, you have probably seen this. This is sometimes called the Landau-Ginzburg potential, right? So what we are trying to do is write down the analog of the Landau-Ginzburg potential for the Higgs field, okay, at high temperature. So this effective potential, V effective, this is of course a function of the Higgs field, but also a function of the temperature. So this typically has, this is of course invariant under the Standard Model gauge symmetries. This has the structure of like this. And these A, B, C, these are all calculable in terms of Standard Model parameters. So these are not new parameters, SM parameters. And at high temperature, okay, on general grounds, one can show that if you plot this V effective versus H, then the potential has actually a minimum at H equal to 0. So V effective has minimum at H equal to 0, which basically means that the symmetry is unbroken. Okay, so expectation value of H is 0 and symmetry is unbroken. And this, again, you probably are familiar with from statistical mechanics. So in a ferromagnet, right? I mean, like for example, if you take the Ising model, for example, two-dimensional Ising model, at low temperature, we know that there is a non-zero expectation value of the spins. Okay, so the symmetry is broken. Okay, the spins get a vacuum expectation value, but at high temperature, the symmetry is in a paramagnetic phase. The system is in a paramagnetic phase, and the symmetry is restored. And that phase transition physics can be described by this Landau-Ginzburg potential. Okay, so this V effective, as I said, is playing the role of the Landau-Ginzburg potential in statistical mechanics. So to study the phase transition, where you go from a zero expectation value to non-zero expectation value, we need to study how, as you vary the temperature, the effective potential goes from here, this shape, to this shape over here. Okay, are there questions? So it turns out that there are two possibilities between which you have to distinguish. So as T reduces, at some value Tc, A vanishes, right? A of Tc is equal to 0. Okay, let me remind you that A was the coefficient of the quadratic term, right? A of T times mod H square plus B of T times mod H to the 4 plus C of T times mod H 6 and so on. So at some point A of Tc becomes 0, okay, and then at that point, okay, for T larger than Tc, the potential here is like this. This is for T larger than, sorry, T less than Tc. And for T greater than Tc, the potential near the origin is like this. But what is important is what is the shape of the potential away from 0. And so there are two possibilities, as I said. Okay, so the first possibility that we can consider, that as T reduces, as T goes down, even when A of T is positive, okay, namely T hasn't come below Tc yet, V effective develops other minima, other local minima at least.
Sir?
Yes, go ahead, please. Is that a question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Sir, at a high temperature, we can consider then all particles have mass 0.
Yeah, you can roughly think of all particles having mass 0. Okay. Except that the temperature itself gives an effective mass to the particles. But that's not important for this discussion. So if you think of them as particles, you can think of as massless particles. Okay, but they give effective mass to the fields.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Okay. So this mass that you see here, right, you shouldn't think of the mass of the particle, but it's more like the mass of the field. Okay, the mass term of the fields, this A of T.
Okay, sir.
Any other question? Okay, so let me explain this picture. Okay, what exactly one means by this. So if this happens, right, then effectively what happens is that if you plot this V effective versus H, even when this is a minimum, okay, that means A of T is 0, it has developed some other minimum. And this can happen because the potential is not quartic anymore. The effective potential has H to the 4, H to the 6, H to the 8, various parts. So some of those coefficients may turn negative, and then it can have developed other minima like this. Now, as t goes down, what may happen is that these minima, okay, will eventually reach 0 and it will come below 0. Now, suppose that when it comes below 0, let me draw this successive picture. So first you reach this stage, okay, where it's exactly 0. And then t goes further down. Then the potential becomes like so if this is a picture that some local minima develop, at some point they reach 0 and then they go below 0. Okay. Even when a of t is remaining positive all through, a of t is remaining positive. Then what's going to happen is that at a temperature above this, the Higgs expectation value was at the origin, it was 0. And at a temperature below this, as the temperature just goes below, the Higgs expectation value suddenly shifts to some other value, which is say H0. Okay, or let me call it H0 tilde, because H0 I have taken as the 0 temperature expectation value. So in this case, what's going to happen is that there is a sudden change in the Higgs expectation value from the origin to H tilde 0. So Higgs vacuum expectation value jumps. Here. So in this case, Higgs jumps suddenly 0 to H0 tilde. And because of this sudden jump, this is what is called the first order phase transition. And the universe goes out of equilibrium. Is this point clear? So repeat again, if the change in the Higgs potential as a function of temperature is like this, the way you have shown here, where when the Higgs starts developing a vacuum expectation value, it still has a minimum at the origin. Then the phase transition is first order, and the universe goes out of equilibrium. Of course, by the time the temperature comes down to 0, this has to turn upside down. But the jump has already taken place earlier. Okay, not when this turns upside down, but when these minima go below 0.
But what temperature scale is this happening in our universe?
These will be all happening around 100 to 200 GeV. Okay, at the weak interaction scale. This weak interaction phase transition happens around 100 to 200 GeV. Okay, because the W masses and Z masses are of the order of 100 GeV, Higgs expectation value is 250 GeV and so on, right? So this is the typical weak interaction scale. So the second possibility is that the minimum of V effective remains at H equal to 0 up to Tc, which means that the potential, as Tc is decreasing, the potential remains like this. Okay, it may develop some other minima somewhere else, but as long as they are above 0, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let me draw it like this anyway. At Tc, the quadratic term vanishes. Okay, so then you have only quartic term onwards. Okay, the potential it still has a minimum. And then as T goes below Tc, as T goes below Tc, the potential turns upside down. But just below Tc, there is a very small negative quantity. So it's like, remember, A of T times mod H square plus B of T times mod H to the 4 and so on, right? So imagine that A of T is just below Tc, right? So it's some constant times T minus Tc. Then for T less than Tc, if we extremize, Tc, you will find that it has a minimum at mod H square equal to, let's see, we can ignore these because these are mod H will turn out to be small, right? So the higher order terms can be ignored. So this will be A over 2b, right? A over 2b minus A over 2b, which is A is proportional to T minus Tc, right? So which is K times Tc minus T by 2b. Okay, that's where the minimum will occur at mod H square equal to K times Tc minus T over 2b. So what this is saying is that as T passes through Tc, the minimum smoothly evolves from 0, which was the case for a T above Tc, to some value, non-zero value for T less than Tc, but the transition is continuous, right? Because as T goes to Tc, this goes to 0. So the minima just smoothly move over from 0 to non-zero value. So this is what is called the second order phase transition. And in this case, the universe remains in equilibrium. Okay, because there is a smooth change in the Higgs vacuum expectation value from 0 to non-zero value. So roughly, whether it's this what happens, or the first order phase transition is controlled by where the quartic term. Okay, remember the Higgs potential has this quartic term. Whether this coefficient turns negative before A turns negative or not. Because when this coefficient turns negative, then it can turn the potential upside down. Right? It can turn the potential downwards. So whether A of T becomes negative first or B of T negative first, that's what is important in deciding on this. Okay, eventually, of course, the whole thing, or B or C, one of these coefficients will have to turn negative. Eventually, of course, it will come back to the standard Higgs potential, right, where A is negative and the quartic term is positive. So the real question then is, which scenario holds for the standard model? So when this calculation was first done, okay, we knew most of the information about standard model except the Higgs mass. So Higgs mass, okay, let me say this. So Higgs mass, okay, given W and Z masses and the electroweak coupling constant, these are also all known from the low energy data, okay, data up to 100 GeV experiments. Given these, the only unknown in the standard model is basically the coefficient of the H square, H to the 4th term is a coefficient of the H to the 4th term equivalently. Okay, this is related to the Higgs mass. So while the result could be stated in terms of a condition on the coefficient of the H to the fourth term, it was stated in terms of the Higgs mass. And what was shown is the following, that if the Higgs mass is less than 72 GeV, then the phase transition is first order. Whereas for MH greater than 72 GeV, it is second order. So today, of course, we know what MH is, right? Today we know that MH is like 126 GeV. Which means that the phase transition is second order. And hence, the universe remains in equilibrium. Okay. So this in turn means that we cannot produce baryon number by standard model physics. Is this clear?
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, the value of MH is less than 72 GeV or greater than 72 GeV, sir. Where it came from?
Oh, this came from, okay. So basically the way it came from is that that the A, B, etc., these coefficients A of t, B of t, C of t, these are calculable in terms of standard model parameters. Okay, using quantum field theory techniques. So you take a standard model parameter, okay, which in this case you can encode in MH, okay? Because as I said, you can either think in terms of a coefficient of the H to the fourth term or MH, okay, because you can determine one in terms of the other. But the important point is that these coefficients can be calculated in terms of the standard model parameter. Then you check as you vary this. So once you have calculated these coefficients, then the shape of the potential is known, right? Because the potential after all is determined by that coefficient. Okay, so whether it's this or that, you can determine as a function of temperature. And then you check between these two possibilities, whether it first turns, the transition is like this, or whether it goes like this.
Okay, sir.
So it's a question of, it's just a fact that you can calculate these coefficients A, B, and C in terms of the standard model parameters, and then you can put that in to get see for which value of the standard model parameters which scenario holds.
Okay, sir.
So that's where this bound is coming. That's where this relation is coming from.
Okay, sir.
Any other question? Okay, so this is bad news, okay, but let's say that maybe there are other ways of producing baryon number. And indeed there are. So let me just describe one of them. That there is a class of theories which are called grand unified theories. So grand unified theories, again, I'll not go into any detail, but let's say the grand unified theories. These unify the standard model gauge group SU3 times SU2 times U1 typically into a single gauge group. And one of the most favorite grand unified gauge group is SU5, like SU5. So the idea is that the actual symmetric group of the theory is SU5, okay, or maybe even larger. Okay, SO10, E6, there are various versions of grand unified theories. And just like SU2 cross U1 is broken by the Higgs mechanism into eventually into U1, the idea is that SU5 is broken at some high energy, at some large energy scale, into this spontaneously. Okay, so SU5 can be spontaneously broken into SU3 times SU2 times U1. And just like when you break SU2, some of the gauge bosons become massive. Okay. When you break SU5, okay, besides the gauge bosons of these, which are massless at that energy scale, there are some massive gauge bosons. Okay, so these give rise to additional massive gauge bosons. Which are typically called X and Y bosons, right? X and Y. There are in fact, I think 6 of them and 6 of them, so they can do the counting. So SU5, let's say how many generators does it have? It's n square minus 1, right? SUN has n square minus 1 generators. So this has altogether 25 minus 1, that is 24 gauge bosons. This has 3 square minus 1, so that's 8. Plus this has 2 square minus 1, that's 3, and this has 1. So that gives you 12. Right? So 12 of these are 12 of the 24 gauge bosons. The rest 12 become massive, okay, at a high scale, and those are called the X and Y bosons. So the reason that I'm discussing this is because these bosons can actually mediate barrier number violation. Okay. So one can show that the interaction vortex, there are interactions of the following form. That it is possible to have a diagram like this. Okay, so where a D comes in, it goes out as E plus. Then there is a X boson exchange. Here U comes in and goes out as U bar. So X boson has charge 4/3, you can see, because D has charge 1/3, E plus has, did I say it correctly? Sorry, this has charge minus 1/3, this has charge 1, right? So you change the charge by minus 4/3. So X carries charge 4/3 and this carries 2/3 and this is minus 2/3, right? So that matches. So this effectively gives a process where D plus U goes to E plus U bar. And now if you put it inside a proton, right, where you have UD, then this can go into, so U and UD together can go into E plus and U bar. So this can go into E plus, U bar and U. So this is like a pion. You can identify this as a pi 0. So this effectively induces a decay like P goes to E plus pi 0. And the point is, you don't see this very often, right? In fact, one can put a bound on lifetime. So lifetime, okay, this is conservative bound. I think 10 to the 34 years, you know. Okay, that's from searching for proton decays in a big sample and not finding any. And this basically tells us that this process must be very, very rare, very, very slow. And the slowness, the reason that it should be, the process is suppressed, can only be attributed to the mass of the X. Okay? Because you don't have that much choice in the coupling, because this coupling is related to the standard model couplings. Okay? So the couplings are fixed more or less. Okay? But the mass of the X is up to you to adjust at which scale the symmetry is broken. So this tells us that Mx is larger than about 10 to the 16 GeV. Okay? That's what the grand unification scale corresponds to. Nevertheless, if inflation happened above this scale, then after this, these X bosons, the X boson mediated interactions, or even the decay of the X bosons could produce baryon asymmetry. Because you can clearly see that this is baryon number violating, right? A proton which has got baryon number 1 is going into an E plus and pi 0 which has no baryon number. So this process can violate baryon number. So for this reason, we may think that let's not worry too much about the fact that the standard model doesn't have baryon number violation. There will be other physics at high energy which can produce baryon number.
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
you go back 2 slides.
2 slides.
Yeah, no, that only. The spontaneous breakdown of the.
Okay, yes.
Is this like saying that when you break this SU5, you exactly reproduce the standard model in its entirety?
Yes, you can, except that there are, of course, heavy bosons. Okay. So there is a way to introduce, so you have to introduce new scalar fields, right? This what is the adjoint scalar fields. And by giving making sure that the potential of the adjoint scalar field is such that it has it acquires a vacuum expectation value in an appropriate fashion, you can reproduce the standard model physics from this SU5 grand theory. Okay, standard model physics plus very heavy gauge bosons and very heavy scalars.
Okay.
So that's the content of the grand unified theory, that it is possible to have low energy physics as given by standard model physics, whereas at high energy the theory differs.
All right.
Okay. Okay. So this seems to say that while we cannot break the baryon number within the standard model, there are other mechanisms to break baryon number. Okay, to generate baryon number. But now we come to the bad news. And that is that any baryon number that might have been generated earlier will be washed out by standard model physics. So let me explain this. In fact, I don't have to do much explanation because we have already seen the appropriate equations. So what did we say earlier? We said that suppose the universe is in thermal equilibrium. And suppose that all the conserved charges are 0. Then all charges are 0. So which means that even if we initially start with a non-zero value of the charges, sum of the charges, as long as the conserved charges are 0, and as long as the universe is in thermal equilibrium, it doesn't matter what non-conserved charges you have to begin with. Thermal equilibrium determines what the non-conserved charges are. And those are 0 as long as the conserved charges are 0. Is this clear? So let me write this equation. So what we have seen, what we saw is that if n tilde L is 0 for every N, that means every conserved charge is 0, then N alpha minus N bar alpha is 0 in thermal equilibrium. So even if initially you start with n alpha minus n bar alpha, which is non-zero, okay, thermal equilibrium makes it 0 as long as all the conserved charges are 0. So even if you produce baryon number in high energy, it will not help because standard model will wash out the baryon number, because standard model has baryon number violation. So while it cannot produce baryon number because the phase transition is second order and hence the universe was in thermal equilibrium, it also says that it can actually destroy baryon number because the universe is in thermal equilibrium and the conserved charges are 0.
But why should the conserved charges be 0 initially?
So what we are saying is that initially, suppose you start from all the, after inflation, all the conserved charges are 0. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Then you produce some baryon number, which is a charge that is not conserved in the standard model. So you are not producing a conserved charge, charge that is conserved in the standard model. So baryon number is not conserved in the standard model, so it will be washed out by the standard model physics. Is this?
Are you saying we need to produce some conserved charge in the sense that get a theory which has a violation of some charge that the standard model preserves?
Yes, exactly. That's what it is. Without that, right, the fact that the universe was in equilibrium, you cannot produce baryon number.
So by that sort of a logic, shouldn't we be able to say that we can have production of charge, like electric charge?
No, electric charge you cannot produce because that's a gauge charge. That is strictly conserved. See, if you have to produce a conserved charge, that means what? That in high energy, there must be microscopic theory which doesn't keep that concept, right?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
So what this is saying is that suppose you have produced a conserved charge, okay, if you have produced a conserved charge, then by definition it is not strictly conserved in the microscopic theory. Okay? But more or less, as soon as you have produced, those interactions will fall below the equilibrium rate, so the conserved charges continue to be conserved.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like in baryon number, suppose you could produce baryon number in the standard model physics. Okay, suppose at 100 GeV or between 100 and 200 GeV, the universe was actually out of thermal equilibrium. Then you produce baryon number. After that, the universe comes into thermal equilibrium. But by that time, the baryon number violating interactions have gone down. Okay, the suppression of it, e to the minus 4 pi square over GW square has taken over. So while the universe has come back to thermal equilibrium, baryon number is behaving as if it's a conserved charge. So then there's a problem, right? Then it's part of n tilde now. You have to think of the baryon number as part of n tilde. It has been produced in the universe and it remains.
Yeah, and why can't we exactly say this for charge, sort of a conserved charge, like electric charge?
Because electric charge is strictly conserved, right? There is no microscopic theory. So what you can say is that you cannot have in the high energy microscopic theory which violates electric charge.
Is that easy to see?
Well, any gauge charge cannot be anomalous. A gauge charge, I mean, we have seen that when you quantize a gauge theory, for example, right? Then gauge invariance plays a crucial role in quantizing a theory, right? Because some degrees of freedom decouple and so on. I mean, those things, you cannot suddenly say that it becomes non-conserved at high energy, right? Because the whole theory breaks down. So in a gauge theory, the gauge symmetry cannot be, it can be spontaneously broken, but it cannot be explicitly broken. And typically spontaneous breaking happens at low energy. So if it's not unbroken at low energy, it cannot be broken at high energy. So that's why you cannot create gauge charges out of it. But you can create charges which are apparently conserved at low energy. Okay, global charges which are apparently conserved at low energy, but which are not conserved at high energy. So baryon number, if it had not been anomalous, then this problem wouldn't have occurred, right? Then once the baryon number is produced in the grand unification scale, it will remain a conserved charge, okay, and there is no physics that can destroy it. The problem comes that's because standard model doesn't respect baryon number symmetry. This can be destroyed at a scale of 100 GeV or more. And so anything that is produced, any baryon number excess that is produced at larger than 100 GeV will be washed out. So it has to be produced more or less at 100 GeV so that just after that, as the temperature comes down, that charge remains and the baryon number starts behaving like conserved charge. Okay? So those rates have to fall below once it's produced.
So not by using statistical mechanics, but like using standard model. If standard model cannot produce baryon numbers, then why should it why should it be able to destroy baryon numbers? I mean,
no, it can produce baryon number, right? It's just because it's an equilibrium that it averages out. See, standard model baryon number is anomalous. Right? So standard model microscopic physics certainly allows production of baryon number, and at 100 GeV and above, that production of baryon number is not suppressed, right? It's a rate is high. It's that the rate goes in both ways, and that's what is destroying the baryon number. Is that point
I
clear?
think I'm a bit confused. I mean, then why, if it could produce, I mean, standard model, if it could produce baryon number, then we didn't have to go to granular divide theories, right?
See, it can produce baryon number microscopically. That means in individual processes, it can change baryon number. But that doesn't mean that there will be net production during the evolution of the universe. Because as we saw that of the Sakharov's three conditions, right, the first two are statements about microscopic theory, that it has to have the ability to change baryon number in certain processes. But the third condition is that of thermal equilibrium. Okay, that's not a condition on the microscopic theory as such. Well, it is in a sense indirectly a condition on the microscopic theory, but at least not directly. That the universe has to go out of thermal equilibrium so that the two processes don't balance out. Okay, even though individually microscopically it can produce and destroy baryon number, the two processes shouldn't be balanced, shouldn't balance out. So what's happening here is that the standard model has the ability to change baryon number. So in equilibrium, if there's an excess baryon number to begin with, it tries to drive the system towards equilibrium, which means that it will destroy the baryon number at a faster rate. Because in equilibrium physics, the baryon number is zero, right? That's what we saw. If all the n tilde L's are zero, the equilibrium physics baryon number is zero. So if there is an excess baryon number, what is going to happen is in the standard model, there will be more rate where baryon is getting converted, the baryon number is removed, than the rate at which the baryon number is produced. And that's the way it's going to destroy the baryon number.
Okay.
So the microscopic theory has the ability to change baryon number. It's just that in equilibrium, that doesn't help you in producing net baryon number. But it helps you in destroying baryon number.
Because the system is out of equilibrium.
Because the system is in thermal equilibrium.
It is driving to, the system is being driven to thermal equilibrium.
To thermal equilibrium, exactly. Because system is in thermal equilibrium, so any excess that was there to begin with, right, will be driven towards the value in thermal equilibrium, right?
Yeah.
And then in thermal equilibrium, there is no net excess baryon number. That's what this equation is saying.
Yeah.
So the only solution then is that somehow you have to create a charge that is conserved in the standard model. And only then you can get out of this puzzle, get out of this problem.
Could we not also, so can't we say that there is something that is not allowing for equilibrium, like maybe sudden expansion of universe again?
Well, but upon that, you cannot have a sudden expansion of the universe without satisfying Einstein's equations, right?
Yeah.
Because you are basically setting up the problem starting from the beginning, say just after inflation. And after that, you really have not much choice, right?
Yeah.
You may imagine that, okay, maybe you have some exotic matter which is driving the system out of equilibrium, right? But it's hard to I mean, you have to basically modify the theory in probably more drastic way than you would want to do, right? Because then that it may have other consequences.
Yeah.
Because you have to modify the system at 100 GeV, right? Not above. Because whatever you do above, as long as around 100 GeV the system comes to thermal equilibrium, this problem remains.
Yeah.
Okay? Because it's only below 100 GeV that the rate of baryon number violation falls. Right? So if you can make sure that some baryon number is created around 100 GeV, that is going to remain. Because below 100 GeV temperature, that rate of destruction or production of baryon number is going to fall. But anything that will create way above 100 GeV is going to wash out, because by the time you have approached 100 GeV, it is being driven towards thermal equilibrium, and by that time, this n tilde L equal to 0 condition will make n alpha minus n bar alpha equal to 0.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I'll stop here today, and so tomorrow we'll see how to get out of this condition, the n tilde L equal to 0 condition. Okay, and we'll also, based on this, we'll be able to make some concrete prediction about, as I have said, that the neutrino excess, you have no idea whether there is excess neutrino over anti-neutrino or not. But we'll see that there is a way to say something about this, okay? Precisely because of this fact that the excess baryon number will be wiped out at the standard model unless n tilde L's are non-zero. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. Are there other questions? Okay, so we'll then meet tomorrow.